You're tuned into The Collective Voice, thought-provoking interviews co-hosted by young adults, fostering deep faith through courageous questions. Welcome to the conversation. Greetings, everyone. Welcome to this episode of The Collective Voice. I'm Reverend Phil Dickey, and Director of Congregational Innovation at Austin Presbyterian Theological Seminary, Austin Seminary. We don't say the other part now. We just say Austin Seminary. I'm going to get used to that eventually after training myself for 3 years to say all of it. Now we just back to Austin Seminary. So grateful to be here for another episode, and my colleague Cece is with me as well. Welcome, Cece.
Hey, everybody. And the interesting thing is that Phil's working at Austin Seminary from Dallas.
That's true.
So,
yes. And
a complicated thing there.
It's not easy.
I'm excited today because we have two guests with us. I'll introduce Caroline because I know Caroline, and we'll let her introduce her best friend from undergrad, Annalise. Thank you both for being with us. Reverend Caroline Grindrod, is that how you say it?
Grindrod,
apologies, is a pastor at one of the pastors at Preston Hollow Presbyterian Church, and she's working with us with our Collective Thread movement, which is a region-based, like, young adult, clergy, and professional ministry leaders kind of cohort group. So we're glad to have you here, Caroline, to hear about your ministry and the connection you have with Annalise.
Yeah, I'm the associate pastor for young adults, developing families, and connection at Preston Hollow, and I've been here about 2 years. And Annalise is my best friend from undergrad. We went to Boston College together. She was my junior year roommate for a semester before I left to study abroad. And she is in San Francisco. She is an Episcopalian priest. Annalise?
Nice to be with you all. I'm the associate rector at St. Jude's Episcopal Church in Cupertino, which is not in San Francisco. It's about 30 miles south, but I live here in the Mission with my husband, who is also an Episcopal priest.
Do people all the time be like, oh, Cupertino, are you like hanging out with all the,
And we are hanging out with all the, I mean, not all, but, a half dozen Apple people at our congregation.
Can't go wrong there. That sounds fun. That's awesome. Well, thank you all so much for being with us. Again, this podcast really is something we want to do to share about the experiences of young adults and their faith formation, specifically like as they emerge out of college and enter into what this lovely time we call young adulthood. But kind of this year, we've really been focusing a lot on young adults who have taken the ministry route, and not just because we only want to focus on like vocational ministry folks, but because that's a challenging route. And so we want to hear the perspective of young adults who are in the midst of it, who have chosen to serve the church in the midst of that. And so to have both of you is just a treat and a gift. And so thank you. Would love to hear a little bit about like your individual journeys of like why, I assume both of you, I'm making assumptions here. I'm going to guess, Caroline, you grew up PCUSA, and Annalise, you grew up Episcopal. Oh, no, I'm sure you... Fantastic.
Caroline did not grow up PCUSA.
Well, I would love to hear that story then, and like what made you decide to go down the PCUSA route?
Yeah. So I grew up evangelical, non-denominational, and I was like very big into the ministry of Young Life. And I went to Boston College as a business major for my undergrad.
Which BC's up with Catholic though, right?
BC's Catholic, right? So like we're all over the place.
Yeah, fantastic.
And so a little bit about Annalise and I is that I was tabling for Young Life at like with a big like fair where everybody signs up for things. And like the fact that Young Life had a table was honestly kind of a joke because there were so few Young Life leaders. Like if anybody's listening to this from the South, it's just like couldn't be more different. There were like maybe 2 or 3 of us. But I was tabling and trying to recruit people, and Annalise came up and I asked her, what are you doing? And what are you majoring in? And she said, I'm going to be a theology major. I'm going to be a priest. And I was like, a what? Like, I was like, you're like this cute little 18-year-old. I don't even think you were 18 at the time. Like
17.
So like, yeah. And you were a 17-year-old that was like, I'm going to be a priest. And I was like, okay, well, I don't really know what that means. But we hit it off and we got lunch together. And then, she kind of introduced me to this whole world. And then I always joke that when I first met Annalise, I was like, oh, she's going to be a priest. She's like so holy. Really only called people can do that. And then I lived with Annalise and I was like, oh my gosh, Annalise is not holier than me. I wonder if I too could be called, right? Because I'm like, she's actually pretty normal. And so there was right by our dorm was a sign, a literal sign that like pointed, this way to the office and this way to the church. And it was just giving directions about St. Ignatius Church. But I would constantly walk by it on my way back to our dorm room. And I'd think to myself, office or church? I wonder which one I'm going to end up in. And then it wasn't till a year after that, or 2 years after that, my senior year, I felt called to ministry. And so then I looked around and said, I need to be part of a church that ordains women. And so I joined a Methodist church for a hot second. I was at a predominantly queer, predominantly Black Methodist church in Boston called Union. And I
love
would
Union.
it to anyone.
Love them.
Yes.
So good. Was there last October. They're so awesome.
Yeah. They're the best. Reverend Williams is awesome. Like, it was such a good community. And I joined that. And then like 9 months later, they started to have this, like, not the church, but the denomination started to have this schism over LGBTQ inclusion. And I was like typing on the church Facebook group, like, do we still exist? Are we still having church on Sunday? I'm like, all of our pastors are gay. I don't know what's going to happen. So then in part because of that, I ended up switching over to the PCUSA and moved to Charleston, South Carolina, and ended up being in Charleston. I moved there August 1st, and a new PCUSA congregation that was mostly former evangelicals opened on September 1st, and I got connected with them. And so I became PCUSA, and I was like, we've already had our schism in this denomination, so that seems like if you're trying to get ordained, maybe pick a church that's already had their schism, unless you have some real ties to somewhere else. And so that's how I ended up at Princeton, and then here in Dallas at a Presbyterian church.
Can I just say, this is the first time I think I've ever heard somebody say, I decided I had a call to ministry because of somebody's humanity. Like like you were so holy and I felt called to that because of because you were really just a good human, your humanity.
You were a great person, and also you were also like kind of messy, and you were also like
very messy. We were good roommates.
Well, yeah, you're both really messy, but you were
and
also
I love you right there, Caroline, being like, you were kind of messy. She's like, we both were kind of messy.
Hot as kettle. It's okay.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Annalise, is there any gaps there you can fill in, maybe with your own story? To be 17 years old and think like, I'm going to be a priest. That's incredible.
Yeah, I know. I sometimes can't believe that I had that like strength of conviction when I was that age, because now I'm like, it really could have not worked out for me, but I guess it did. So I grew up Episcopalian. My family has lots of pastors in it and like all over kind of like mainline Protestantism. But by the time I came along, shortly after I was born, my parents started attending an Episcopal church. So that's where I was raised. I was baptized ELCA, but that's close enough.
Represent!
I would just like to say they're all represented very well here.
Oh, okay. Yeah, my parents both went to Pacific Lutheran University and like became Lutheran while they were there, and then they were Lutheran for like 10 years after college until they got to California, and there was no good ELCA church where I grew up. And so there was like a Missouri Synod church, but no, and the Episcopal church was like literally 2 blocks from our house. So we went there.
Wasn't the Lutheran church you were baptized in like 5 minutes away from BC?
Yes. So I was born in Boston. My parents were grad students at Harvard, and we went to Lutheran Church of the Newtons, which is in Newton Center. And I lived on the like freshman campus that's right by Newton Center. And actually my first Sunday of undergrad, my mom was still with me because she had just moved me in. And she was like, let's go to church there. Like, we haven't been back in 18 years, whatever. And the pastor was still there. He was like really pretty old and like about to retire, but he remembered us, and it was the same guy who had baptized me, so it was kind of fun.
That's real sweet. Yeah. I love that so much.
A super full circle thing before undergrad.
I know, it was sweet, but I didn't keep going there. They really wanted me to keep going there, but they didn't really have any
they did.
Other college students, so that wasn't quite the right fit. But so I came to BC knowing that I wanted to be a priest. I had been like super involved in my Episcopal church growing up, and because there was lots of clergy in my family, it didn't feel like a unusual call. I have an aunt who's an ELCA pastor. So my dad was the one who actually like suggested to me that I consider ministry when I was in high school. And I pretty quickly came around. I was like, anything your parents suggest when you're in high school, you have to like view with some level of skepticism, but I pretty quickly came around to it. And then decided I wanted to study theology undergrad just to like try it out. So I came to BC and met Caroline. The rest of that story is basically accurate. I mean, my experience of I knew that I wanted to be a pastor, and I like really loved the Episcopal Church, and the Episcopal Church at that time, and honestly still, doesn't like have a really strong sense of community for people in that age group. Like I went to the Episcopal College ministry at BC, and it was like one other undergrad and then 3 PhD students. And I just like didn't really feel like that was going to be my friend group. And I had gone to an evangelical church also in high school with friends because that was like the big church in town. And so I was pretty comfortable with evangelicals, and I had been to Young Life camps. That's why I went to that table. So I think I considered myself like an Episcopalian sort of, but like mostly just a Christian who had a call to ministry and was finding my way. And I loved going to a Catholic school. I think that's like one big difference between Karen and I. Like I was very involved in like the Catholic side of BC. I always joked with people like if I wasn't a woman, I would have converted while I was in college. Like I really love the Catholic Church, but I knew I wanted to be a priest, and that wouldn't be an option if I converted. So I stayed sort of nominally in the Episcopal Church until well after college. I went to Union with Caroline for a year, I guess. And then I went to Trinity Church in Boston, which had lots of young adults, still does, and met some people there and was like, okay, I guess I'm back. And then I shortly after that met my husband, who was like I joke, he was in like the cool, like big young Episcopal friend group in Boston, which I always suspected existed, but I didn't know who they were until I met him and then moved into their intentional community. And then, began discernment kind of like in earnest then. And then from then until I got ordained was like 3.5, 4 years.
Will you say more about intentional community you lived in?
Yeah, it's called CRESH, the Charles River Episcopal Co-Housing Initiative Endeavor. It's like one of those silly acronyms, but there are houses all around the Boston metro area that are affiliated with a parish. And ideally, everybody who lives in them goes to that parish. That's not always a goal that's like achievable, but so I lived in the one affiliated with Emmanuel Church on Newbury Street. So most people there went to Emmanuel, although I was still kind of nominally involved at Trinity, and some people worked at other churches. And I lived there for like not that long, like 6 months before seminary. Just during COVID. I probably would never have lived there if it weren't for COVID, but I was sort of like forced to move in if we wanted to keep dating. So.
And where'd you go to seminary?
And then, so then I'm from the Bay Area, and I then moved back to the area in the fall of 2020 to go to Church Divinity School of the Pacific in Berkeley, which was still in person, although they had recently been bought by Trinity Wall Street. Trinity Wall Street still owns them, and now it's only an online seminary, and it's very different, that's a whole other story. But I had a great experience of being one of the last in-person cohorts at the historic like Holy Hill, all the other seminaries in the area. It was lovely.
The other interesting thing about Annalise and I's like crossover at BC was like I was in evangelical world. She was like she said, like more involved in the Catholic stuff. I was like too evangelical. I was like, oh, I don't think that they mean me when they say that, which I came around to. Thank you, Annalise, by the end of seminary or by the end of undergrad. But we both got involved with like a kind of Pentecostal group, and because they were really like good at recruiting and were very fun and were constantly like inviting people in. And so we both were part of that for a long time. And speaking of intentional community, we talked about intentional community at that first lunch that we had. I think maybe your parents lived in an intentional community or something like that. And then you lived in the Pentecostal-ish church's intentional community for a little while there in college.
That's very true. Yeah, when we first met, Caroline was the language that church used was like discipling other people, meaning like a one-on-one like mentorship relationship. And this girl who was discipling Caroline lived in that house that I later lived in. It was like an all-girls house. It's a lot of fun. But yeah, I mean, I sort of knew like this church is like totally not aligned with my values, but like maybe not totally. In lots of ways they weren't aligned with my values, but like the people there were really cool. So I mean, I like had a strong sense of ministry, and I was like like every other 18-year-old, like I just wanted to like be in with the cool kids and like find the people that were like having a lot of fun together.
Right. And we were just like hopping around so much, right? Like you were writing for the Catholic newspaper and like, but you were still identifying as Episcopalian. I was doing Young Life and was going to Antioch Bible studies. I like had an Antioch Bible study at my house, but then also was going to
my senior year after you left.
Yeah. But then we were both going to Reality, which was like a church plant from a church in California. And it was at Reality that Annalise was like, don't you feel kind of weird about the fact that like a woman could never preach here? And I was like, no, I love this music. It makes me cry every week. Constantly doing the like slow song to like really loud song, like 6-song progression that makes you cry. And it worked every time. And so I was like, surely this is the Holy Spirit. And I'm not really worried about whether women are allowed to preach here.
They weren't even allowed to be elders. They couldn't even like vote on the friggin' budget.
Yeah. This was before I started like really reading church websites.
Hold on, let's just pause there. Because I think what you just said about reading church websites, like, and I think there's a much broader conversation here around, like, we talked about this, I think, in an episode recently, just about the idea of, like...
Literally last episode with Carter, no?
That's right. Like, the idea of, like, not believing yourself into belonging, but belonging yourself into believing.
Yes.
And, like, really there's just such a sense of wanting to, like, to have a space, right? Like, wanting to be a part of something,
Yeah. My brother... I've gotten really careful about church websites because of this, and believe like that idea of like belonging. My brother's gay and he lives in New York City, and he went for 6 years to Hillsong, and he was like, no, they say everybody's welcome here every week. Like they are affirming. Like I just know it. And I was like, okay, maybe. And then one week he was there and they said, we all know that marriage is between a man and a woman, and everyone around him cheered. And he was like, what is happening? And so then he actually emailed Carl Lentz, the pastor, and said like, would you officiate my wedding? Are my friends welcome here? Blah, 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 blah. And Carl emailed him back and said, your friends are absolutely welcome here. You're so loved here. You're so welcome here. Blah, 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 blah. Did not answer would I officiate your wedding question. And like Annalise said, my brother's a musical theater guy. He's not like a close reading of the text, exegeting the letter from the pastor. And so I'm reading this like this is bad news, and David's reading this like this is great news. He's so nice. So then that's how I put myself in charge of finding a church for David in Charleston, because I can read through the like, okay, you're actually affirming or you're actually not affirming.
Yeah.
We also spoke last week in our episode with a Presbyterian pastor here in Austin, Carter Grant. I don't know how connected the cities are, but she was talking about a little bit about she's both at a congregation and the U-Kirk here.
Yeah.
And so she's like, for so long, most mainline Protestants have just taken a back seat to campus ministry, like young adult formation, and have just handed it over to evangelical non-denominational churches that have, done Young Life or were really present on campus. And so it's interesting to me in this observation of one, just like the deep ecumenicism that y'all held. And I don't know if it was in part like going to a Catholic school or your own curiosity. Like I was born and raised in a Lutheran church. When I went to college, I worshiped at a Lutheran church, and I went to the Lutheran campus ministry. So maybe that says more about me than it does about you, right? But my wondering is, as you were in that young adult time period, which is often filled with like deconstruction, right? What did I learn from my family? What do I actually believe about myself? What did I come to college wanting to study? Where do I want to actually go now? Like so much transformation. Can you share a little bit more about that faith transformation that you experienced personally, and how dwelling in such diverse spaces religiously impacted it. Because, like, I agree, Caroline, there are some things that we can learn from good music. I mean, curated music, right? But like good and songs and
Like
that
how
are
to make
deeply
people cry.
impactful.
Yeah.
That, yes, but are also like on my Jesus Vibes playlist, right? Like I got Hillsong on there because it's good. So yeah, there's a question there somewhere.
Yeah. That's interesting. I mean, I've actually never been asked this, like what parts of my like Episcopal identity did I like deconstruct during those years? But I was just thinking about this for like a sermon I'm working on right now, that a lot of what I think the biggest thing that I now know was like missing from my like childhood faith formation, and this is so classic of the Episcopal Church, was like any sense of what God's justice means in like a capitalist society. That sounds like a little bit heady, but I really mean that. Like when I got to college, one of the most like profound, like huge changes in my faith was like learning for the first time what liberation theology was. Like nobody had told me in 18 years of being an Episcopalian that God had a preferential option for the poor. They would never say that. I say that in like sermons in an Episcopal church now, and people are like, okay, like, are you sure about that? And I was just saying, like, I disagree, like Antioch's values were like wholly different than mine, except for some things. The thing I was thinking about is like when I first moved into that house, they made me memorize like Acts 2:42, whatever it is, that like having all things in common. That was like their huge thing. And people so often would like, I mean, so many people in that community just like didn't have a lot of money. Were like really intensely leaning on the whole, like, we're trusting God to provide, which has some issues. That theology has some issues, but also like Episcopalians could use a lot more of that theology, a lot more of a sense of like trusting God to provide, and that like accumulating material wealth is like really not, is so intensely not the point, and so much of the Bible is about how that is not the point. And Catholics, of course, are like really good at teaching. I think they're really good at teaching that. There's like a really strong understanding, especially in the kind of, you know, Pope Francis was Pope at the time, and we were at a Jesuit school. So in the Jesuit world of Pope Francis, there was a really strong sense of like liberation theology is correct. Like, it's not just correct for Latin America. It's not just correct for like the poor people in El Salvador. It's like we all need to understand God in this way. So I think that during those years, I did a lot of that deconstruction. Also, even in high school, that was when the what was it called? The like Wall Street movement. Now I can't even remember what it was called.
Occupy Wall Street.
Thank you. Occupy Wall Street was going on. And I like remember learning during that time, like, oh, you know, most of the people I know are the 1%. Like, I'm the problem, not the solution. Because I grew up in, also, like, I should have said this, but I grew up on the peninsula in Menlo Park and Atherton, which are like incredibly wealthy communities. At the Episcopal Church in that place is just like, you know, another level than lots of people can imagine.
Yeah.
That was probably my biggest deconstruction. I don't know about you, Kay.
Yeah, I mean, I think we definitely would talk about like the deconstruction of wealth and almost like deconstructing the expectation of wealth, because I mean, I was in business school, but like I think growing up both in the neighborhood, like I grew up in a fairly affluent neighborhood and family as well. And so being able to have somebody be like, oh yeah, we can talk about being like having to think this through and not having thought it through before. And that's okay. And that's actually a good thing that we have each other to talk through this with, rather than leaning on people who are like, what do you mean you've never thought about not having money? You're like, yeah. As a main goal in your life. I would say like I went through a very clear deconstruction process, and it probably started with my brother coming out in 2009. So I was a ninth grader. And I would say that like what I believed and what evangelicals in Young Life believed were like one perfect circle of a Venn diagram until my brother came out. And then it was like slowly moving apart. And so the beginning part of college was really interesting because I felt like I had to come out on behalf of my brother all the time. Like I would find ways to slide into conversations like, oh, my brother's gay, and this is like something that you should know before you say something offensive to me. And And so that like started, and then I had gone to an intentionally interracial church in Baltimore City in my high school years. And so I've been learning about race and racism there. But then while we were in college, was the first Black Lives Matter movement following the murder of Trayvon Martin. And I was living with a Black woman, and she just like was so helpful in conversation to be able to have somebody kind of guiding me. And like she was always going through her own perspectives and her own learnings, but I think those conversations were really helpful. And then I studied abroad in South Africa, and so like all of that was like kind of combining, and I was becoming more and more progressive. And you know, women in church leadership had always been something that I like thought was good, but didn't care deeply about. And then my senior year was the 2016 election, and so I like feel like that was like a very clear breaking point in my life, where I like woke up and was like, oh my gosh, what do you mean all these people who talked about character my whole life don't think that it matters? Fortunately, like people I was close to, that wasn't true for. But mostly. And then I would say in my young adulthood, it was a combination of deconstructing and reconstructing, right? Like I had felt called to ministry by that point, and I went to Union, and one of my favorite stories from Union was Reverend Nikki was leading a Bible study, Nikki and Jordan Harris at the time. And it was a Bible study that was going to be a year long. And they were going to read not the entire Bible, but like portions of like read through the Bible in portions. And because I was like an overachiever and was like recently called to ministry, I was like, this is the Bible study I'll sign up for. I'll be here every week, you know, and I had never been in intergenerational community like that before. And there was like an older lesbian couple that like one woman was Black and one woman was white and one woman was blind, and they brought soup every week. And I was like, this is incredible. I don't know what's happening here, but it's awesome. But I'm like sitting at this table, and like I said, mostly queer people, mostly people of color. And the opening question on the first day was like, what is your relationship with the Bible like? And I sat next to Nikki, the pastor, again, because I was the like front of the class girl. And luckily Nikki went the other direction instead of having me answer first. And if I had answered first, I would have said, my relationship with the Bible is good. And I try to have a quiet time in the mornings. And I love this scripture and like blah, 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 blah. And that would have been my answer. And then instead she went the other way around. And I heard from all like 14 of these people, oh, the Bible's been used against me. The Bible has created oppression. The Bible has created harm in these places in my life, in these structures, in these neighborhoods. And so then by the time it got to me, I was like, oh, I am going to adjust my answer because I have found out that I don't know everything, or that there's a lot more here. And so, yeah, I think that period of deconstructing and leaning into a community that didn't have a like set aside young adults group, but instead just deciding that I was going to be part of it. And the only other young adult, one of the only other young adults that was not on staff there was Justin Pearson, who is now the state representative in Tennessee that got thrown out of the...
Wow.
That's amazing.
Yeah, he's awesome. And he was always really loud in church. And he like freaked out my boyfriend at the time because he was so loud in church. And we got rid of the boyfriend, and like Justin is killing it. So thank goodness. And then I like went and I like asked this woman, June Blunk, to go to coffee with me. And she was maybe 87, but she lived in my neighborhood. And then when I did break up with that boyfriend, I was crying in church one day, a theme of this podcast. And she came over to me and she was like, well, what are you carrying? And I was like, my boyfriend and I just broke up. And she's like, well, let me carry some of that. I've got a strong back. It's like, this is all I've ever needed. So
if that's not a shout out for intergenerational connections, I don't know what is.
I mean, truly, I'm like, ask people who are not in your generation to go to coffee. Yeah. Just do it. It's going to be great.
Yeah.
Can I just say, I love so first of all, the Bible piece. Yes, I like almost didn't study. So I studied religion at a public university in Missouri, an undergrad, not knowing you even could because I was very just not aware of university life. But I really didn't. I thought about not doing it because I was like, what is there to learn about the Bible though? It's all basically been settled, like small town Missouri. It was like the Bible says it, that settles it. It's all done. Like what else am I going to learn, right?
Just read it and do it.
Just read it. Yeah. Right? Like what's so complicated about this? Talk about deconstruction, right? But the other piece that I really wanted to bring up, and at least what you talked about, like this idea of liberation theology, part of the reason this podcast started really was because one of the young adults I had, who I did as a youth from Highland Park United Methodist, and I worked there back in the day, which if you know Highland Park, like also a very wealthy neighborhood, right? Mm-hmm. He read a book by Damon Garcia about it's called The God Who Riots, and it's all about liberation theology. And he basically like messaged me and was like, "Have you heard about liberation theology?" I was like, "Wait, yet." Yes, I have. And he was like, "Why did we never talk about this in youth ministry?" And I was like, well, that's a really good question. But then like, I think I heard Jared Bias say on the Bible for Normal People, I don't know if y'all ever heard of that podcast, but where he talked about like, if all theology has an adjective, and if you don't have an adjective on your theology, you're probably like worshiping the oppressor religion, like the oppressor. And I was like, oh, damn, like, yeah, that's, okay. And so again, by adjective, right? Like whether that's liberation theology, queer theology, womanist theology, black theology, like there's just so many adjectives you could throw in there. And if you don't have one, then you gotta kind of like step back and be like, well, what is the adjective there though?
Yeah.
That was a heavy realization for me, right? So I love this. This is such a beautiful conversation. Go ahead, Caroline.
I will tell you that, who was the liberation theologian that spoke at BC, Annalise? Was it Gustavo Gutierrez?
Yeah.
Was he still alive? Yes. Okay, that's what I was thinking. Gustavo Gutierrez spoke at BC, and it was a packed out room. Like the undergrads of BC
was like the sexiest thing. Like they really did a good job of making it like the thing everybody wanted to be a part of.
Yeah. Hold on, you just said liberation theology was the sexy thing at BC? Yeah, that's for sure going on social media. You can tune in to 77 Collective for that's great.
It was great.
It totally was. The most popular campus ministry groups were like the immersion trip to Latin America. Like the application was like 10 pages long, and they only accepted like 10% of the people who applied. Like it was crazy. I thought that I was like a shoo-in, and I got rejected the first time I applied and was like, oh wait, everybody wants to do this. Like I'm not special. Yeah.
I'm wondering if y'all, we've had a lot of young adults on the podcast, and as Phil said, a lot are ministry professional, ministry adjacent, and some of them have shared the struggle of like retaining friends, making friends, especially as like a young adult clergy person. A friend of mine from seminary was on. She's like a pastor in rural Iowa, and she's like, there are no young people to be friends with here. So I'm actually interested, like, in your friendship as people, right? And then is there a way, like, thinking about your friendship and as a space of belonging, and then as a space of support for the work that you then are able to do in Cupertino and in Preston Hollow, Dallas area?
Yeah, I mean, I think about this a lot. Like, if you had told me when Caroline and I first became friends that like we would spend like half of the time that we spend talking about like work, basically, I would have been like, what, really? But I guess I can't really like relate as much to the feeling of isolation of being a young pastor because I got incredibly lucky. I don't know. I'm God's favorite because my best friend is a pastor and my husband is a pastor. So just kidding. But
I'm God's favorite. Also going on social media.
Okay. I'm God's second favorite. Like I'm dating a pastor.
It feels like and Caroline too. Like her boyfriend's a pastor, and and I'm. We all have each other.
There are some that might say you're all cursed, but I'm just going to throw that out there too,
oh,
right?
That's true. But
just kidding.
In when I look out at the landscape of like, there are like who are the other clergy I could be colleagues with? Who are the other young like? I guess like these people don't always like what I see. I don't always feel like these are my people. Like the other young clergy in my diocese, like. Some of them I'm friends with, but some of them I'm like, it's just, your options are pretty limited. You don't like have the luxury of picking somebody who you would be friends with anyways, who is also in your line of work and you can talk. But like Caroline and I were already friends. Like we picked each other because we liked each other, not because we were both in ministry.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like part of that like kind of gave me some confidence that I was going to be able to find friends as a clergy person, because I was like, well, really the only like one of the people that I'm closest to is a clergy or like Annalise started seminary a bit before me, but
1 year before.
even so, I like watched her, start to date her husband and like that live in that whole little community. And I was like, I don't know, they figured it out. And then going to a residential seminary, going to Princeton, I made some incredible friends. And so I definitely feel for like one of my best friends is a non-binary pastor in Cheyenne, Wyoming. Okay, not the easiest place to be a non-binary pastor. Or like my other good friend is a queer disabled pastor in Ames, Iowa. And like they're doing incredible stuff, and making friends is a challenge. I think that because I live in a bigger city, I've been able to make some friends, and I've also feel like I didn't need them to be people who understood the church. I actually needed them to be people who didn't understand the church and didn't really care. And so that has been helpful to just be like, I'm going to make a separate group of friends that's not related to the church at all. And then when I need to lean on people or say like, I don't know what to do with this pastoral problem, I have my friends from seminary, I have Annalise, and then, hopefully we're starting this young ministry professionals collective here in Dallas. So we'll have those folks too. But I think I've been really fortunate in that way.
Totally. I mean, I also think that like a huge part of it is that we both live in major cities. Like there is a lot of, I think the people who feel really lonely in ministry as young adults don't live in a major city. And that I almost feel like is something that you have to discern separately, like whether you're called to like that kind of life. And like, frankly, at this moment in my life, I don't think I could do that. I mean, I guess I could do it, but it doesn't feel like where I'm called. And part of it is that I really like urban ministry. And so like, a distinctive thing that you're not going to do in Ames, Iowa. But there's plenty of people outside of the church.
Yeah. And I do think like rural ministry is so valuable, because it's like, oh, you are giving people access to a theology that isn't always available in those areas. And that's maybe a broad generalization. And both of those places, like Cheyenne and Ames, are cities in their own right. But I think that like those ministries in particular, those are my friends, like they're doing work that is really incredible. And I'm just like so grateful that they're called to that, and that they're figuring out how to be excellent pastors in those places.
Mm-hmm. The Episcopal Church also is a little bit different in that like you're tied to your diocese unless they release you. So part of it is like I don't really have to wrestle with this problem because I'm a priest in the Diocese of California, and unless I like actively ask my bishop to leave this diocese, the Diocese of California is like the 5 Bay Area county. Like it's a megalopolis. It's not like there's nowhere I could go that would not be pretty urban.
Yeah, I mean, that is an important distinction is 1, the calls to ministry, 2, where you end up being situated. And then 3, there's also the circumstance, right? And it depends, like, Annalise, you're married to a priest, so y'all probably had to do like the navigation of where you can both be called. My friend who we had on the podcast, like she's married to a Lutheran pastor. They had to negotiate where they both could like be called and be able to drive. And then, what happens when one of them's moving forward in a call process, but then the call process stalls out for the other. But what I just want to observe briefly, and then I'm sure Phil has a better question than I can come up with. No pressure, Phil. But the way that you spoke about friendship as a place of belonging in terms of like, no, like I hang out with Annalise not because she's a priest, but because like she's a person that I love and care about, and like we have this relationship. And when I first met her, I was like, of course she's going to be a priest. She's the most holy person I know. And then I lived with her, and I was like, man, this holy girl is a little bit messy. And that kind of breaks down the holier I don't know, pedestal to see her humanity. And so for, I don't know, I think relationships, and especially with best friends, and y'all have been friends for a while, right? A true gift of that is it gives you the sense of belonging because you're a person, not because of the work that you do, but because of the ways that you mess up and fail and are hilarious and are human.
I also think something I think about a lot with Caroline is like I could ask my Episcopal colleagues their opinions on things, but like I also just like trust her more because of that, all those experiences that we've had. Like other people, I don't feel as comfortable, like, I don't know, like not even being vulnerable, but like admitting my like not so holy thoughts or parts of myself too, because they're my professional colleagues and I want them to think that I'm like, you know, worthy company or whatever. Care's seen me through I also think like immature time of my life for sure. Like I think a lot about this when the first Black Lives Matter movement was happening. You know, I was coming from this like super white suburb in California in a wealthy Episcopal church, Episcopalians, not very racially diverse. There was like a lot of things that I did and said during that time as I was learning, but that like I feel like pretty embarrassed by now. And like, but as a result, like Caroline was there for that, and like she doesn't hate me because I said and did those things. And now I feel like if I encounter not even, it doesn't have to be like race relation issues, but like similar issues, like I know we can talk about it and I can like trust her and it's not like awkward or embarrassing or whatever.
I think Annalise and I also, like, half of our friendship was built off of like friendly debate. And I think that that's something that really works for us is like, we're happy to be like, all right, we're going to like pretend like we don't talk, like we don't frame it like that, but it's like, you're going to take the pro side and I'm going to take the against side. And we actually both don't really know or care. Like our skin is not in the game in this, but like, let's like work out what we're thinking with each other. And that, like as an external processor and as somebody who like, I don't know what I think about something until I've been in a conversation about it. It's really helpful to be like, I don't know, what do you think? And then just kind of go at it a little while. It's something that annoys some of my family members. And so they're really happy when Annalise and I get together, and they're really happy when they don't have to be part of the debate.
That's funny.
Do you see that play?
It's the opposite. We debate everything.
Yeah.
Do you see that playing out though in the church? Like, are you seeing spaces or creating spaces where folks can actually honestly engage in such kind of dialogue to help, whether that's bridge the divide or at least just be in conversation? Or are we just so in our own echo chambers that, like, for the most part, people within our congregations are just kind of on the same, not always thinking the exact same, but like we maybe assume we think the same, so we don't engage in the dialogue because we think we're the same because we go to the same church, you know, like that kind of stuff. Are you seeing that take place?
I actually think young adults are pretty bad at this and older people are much better at it. I mean, that's at least my
hot take.
Maybe that's a hot take, but in my context, like most of the like young adult progressive Christians I know, not just Episcopalians, kind of like are fundamentalists, just like in a different way. They're fundamentalists in that like you must believe like all of these different political and religious takes. Otherwise, like you're going to be ostracized from our company. And there are some even like entire churches that are in that category. But my congregation right now, and Caroline's way more so, is like somewhat politically mixed. The South Bay tends to be a little bit more conservative, and like the part of like West San Jose / West Santa Clara County that we are in is like fairly, it's obviously still California Democrat, but it's like a little more mixed. And I see people in my congregation having like really good, interesting conversations with each other about all kinds of political issues, but like from a Christian perspective. And sometimes young people, I really appreciate that the young people at my church like engage in those conversations, but I think that even they would say they feel more comfortable engaging in it with like 50-year-old conservative than they would with each other, because they know like we are different and we're meeting somewhere in the middle. And the 50-year-old conservative and the 50-year-old progressive like have been going to church together for 20 years, and they know that they have always disagreed. So they can either just like not talk about it at all, or now that we're in this like very contentious political moment, they can decide that it is time to talk about it and to like stay at the table with each other. So I don't know. I wish young adults would like be a little less I hate to use the term of the of the other side, but like a little less snowflakey in church.
I also, as somebody who came out of evangelicalism, I like switched my beliefs but kept my operating system for a really long time. So it was like, okay, instead of getting to the place where we confess our sin and thinking entirely about like sexual purity, we're gonna like confess our sin and it's gonna be racism like every time, or like whatever, like and so it was like, oh, I'm gonna go from believing these things to these things, but I'm gonna believe them as strongly and as like clearly I'm right, you're wrong, black and white thinking. And so then it took me a really long time to say, wait a second, I need to both deconstruct those beliefs, but I also need to deconstruct the like, I'm right, you're wrong operating system, because the people who are inviting me into this more progressive place are not the people that are asking me to like be a fundamentalist about it. They're inviting me into something richer than that, which I really love. When it comes to those kinds of conversations, it is helpful to be in conversation with somebody you know, because then like, I think it's really hard to ask people to debate topics when they don't know the stakes of the other person in the conversation. And this, like, it goes back to when I would casually try to tell people that my brother was gay at the beginning of college. Is like, that was such a hot topic of debate in the church at the time that I felt like I was leading with that, so that if we wanted to have a debate, we could have a debate, but we could know that like I was coming at it with a personal connection and you were coming at it with a thought and an idea. And so I do think, and I think that there's room for that. Like, I do think that people need to have conversations about these ideas, even without the personal relationships. But I think that it's really hard for me to say, oh, I want to, debate this topic with a group of people where I'm not sure how this topic has impacted their life.
Yes. Yeah. A great example that comes to mind for me of this is like, when I was in seminary and we would be planning like morning and evening prayer, I always picks hymns. And there was kind of like a militant, like, slashing of hymns happening among the student body. Like, we can't do that one because it's by this like person who was a slave owner. We can't do that one because it's by this like person who harassed women, whatever. And like also a intense exegeting of like hymnody lyrics. I remember one time we wanted to sing Amazing Grace, and everybody basically took it as a given, and maybe they were just like all playing along, but I was like, I did not know this was a thing at all, let alone a given, that like it was wrong to say I'm blind but now I see.
Oh, and interesting.
I was like, they were like, oh yeah, like that's like ableist of us, whatever, like to assume that they didn't even deconstruct, they didn't even like explain themselves. They were like, that's just like, that's an ableist lyric. And then this other girl was like, oh, I found this other like new rewriting of it that's so much better. It doesn't have that in it. So like, let's use that one. And everyone was like, yeah, let's use that one. Like, no further conversation about whether or not that line was like actually ableist or like what it was saying or anything about that. So we just put it in. And then we have our weekly Eucharist at the seminary, which is open to neighbors. And there's this woman who's been coming. She came to like every Thursday Eucharist at CDSP for, who knows, the last 30 years. She lives like up the hill and she's blind. And we all know her and like love her. And she was like, why did you guys change that? And somebody was like, oh, it's an ableist lyric. Like we had, we don't want to assume that like, we don't want to equate blindness with evil or whatever. And she was like, that lyric like means so much to me because, I could see when I was a child and I lost my sight, and the miracle of knowing that like someday in the kingdom of God, I will be able to see again, like is something that I look forward to. Like, why would you assume that that's like equating blindness with evil? And so I just had this moment of realization of like, okay, we didn't even like have a conversation about this. We did not do what you just said, Karen, like investigate who else was going to be impacted. She wasn't in the planning conversation, but we didn't think about like who else would be in the room and like what it would mean to those people. If we had thought about that, I honestly think that the students would have like made an assumption on her behalf that she wouldn't like that lyric rather than going out and asking her. And like that kind of like militance without like, that just it does sometimes start to feel like fundamentalism to me, in that it's not like curious. They're like progressives like to talk a big talk about curiosity, but then sometimes we don't actually have any curiosity. We just assume that the new thing is better than the old thing.
I had similar dynamics at the seminary that I went to, and specifically around Lutherans robe with like a white alb. And like when kids get confirmed, they're typically wearing like a white robe, baptism with white robe. And there's a conversation in one of my classes, progressive Lutheran seminary, and like, well, we can't wear white. Like that's just equating white with holy and white with good. And there was a Black male student that was like, I mean, you decide that for yourself, but like, don't take away the symbol of this to me or equate race into something for me. And to your point, Annalise, at least in the parish that I served, which was a little bit more rural, more suburban, the people did, I mean, they were really progressive people and there were very conservative people, and they were also people. Right. And they could sit down at the same table. And when it was a conversation approached in love and curiosity, it was one thing. But if I tried to go in to a visit with a parishioner who had Fox News on and try to say, hey, Fox News is really bad, or, you know, the reverse side too, hey, that is really just liberal propaganda, that just shuts down the conversation. Shuts down the sense of any sort of like community growth opportunity for either side, right? For a story, for transformation. And I guess there's also a uniqueness of being in ruralish Texas, right? I've been in those spaces and also just wonder how to navigate it and wonder, like, can I make a decision for myself and like my faith and also the people I care about in my life, rather than being like, well, this is how I have to say things in order to belong. And when I went to seminary, I also went to Chicago as a Texan. And I'd tell people, they'd say stuff and I'd be like, that would never work in my home congregation. Like flat out. And I'm from Austin. That strategy is just not going to work. And they get really mad at me. And I'm like, I mean, you can't do ministry with people if they're just upset at you the whole time.
Right.
So we learned a lot. Freshman year, first year seminary.
There's
a lot of growth there.
Like what a gift to have a space to work those things out, right? And I think that's sometimes what we don't have as regularly or as often, and that makes me sad. And I miss that seminary experience too, right? Like I miss a space to cultivate such a rich conversation that just doesn't happen regularly.
I think like in some ways, like the most important thing for young clergy is to like find people that you trust enough to have those conversations with, even if like you don't always agree with them. And sometimes that, it's sad if you can't find that, but like be picky, like find those people if you can.
I feel like we could keep going for a very long time. But this has just been truly such a beautiful, rich conversation. And I'm grateful for your friendship because it's been really beneficial to us in the conversation we've had. And I hope that it can be just a good model for other young adults out there in the world, whether they're in vocational ministry or not. But like you said, having a space where somebody you can trust. And I hear you on the idea too of like, it's so nice having a friend that isn't in my like diocese or isn't like, you know, like sometimes that separation.
It's nice.
Right. Yeah. That goes a long way sometimes. So there's a good, we are embodying ecumenism right now, right? Like look, all four of us here, like
all
just
of us.
living it up here. Well, okay. So again, if folks are wanting to find the two of you, if they're in, say one more time, what churches you represent, just so they can come find you and worship with you.
I'm at St. Jude's Episcopal Church in Cupertino.
And I'm at Preston Hollow Presbyterian Church in Dallas.
Okay, and one of my favorite last questions for people is just, will you share where you're seeing beauty right now? Where you're finding beauty in the world?
I mean, I feel like I have a cop-out answer, which is that I have an 8-month-old child, so it's really easy to find beauty. It's like, it's the biggest gift of motherhood is how easy it is to like see God every day enfleshed.
Okay, wait, that was going to be my answer too. Was like getting to watch Annalise be a mom. And I think it's something I think about with young adulthood is like, once you leave college, and I know it happens for other people at other times, you're like, lives start to kind of go at different paces. And like Annalise got married and, you know, had a kid like, and we're still good friends. And it's not like, oh, you know, she's gone off to some motherhood land where I can't participate in our friendship, which I think is something that happens in young adulthood. We kind of start to divide based on that. But it's been really a delight to watch Annalise be a mom and to just love it so much, and have such a good experience. And my sister's she just had a newborn. She has a 1 month old as of 2 days ago. And so I think that kind of has just sparked a lot of joy in our life.
Yeah. We love babies. We both always love babies.
We've always loved babies.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again, Caroline, Annalise, for the ministry that you're doing. Like Phil said, we're grateful that you took time out of your Wednesday, out of when your child is napping, when you got busy work, both of you you're doing, to share about your friendship and your experiences. So many blessings for y'all as you do this work. And thank you. And thanks to those who are listening too.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Collective Voice, the premier podcast of the 787 Collective. For more information, visit us at 787collective.org or find us on social media. And if you enjoyed what you heard, be sure to subscribe, rate us, and share a review. For when you do, you are tricking the algorithm for the common good.